What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Yours Truly podcast. Today, I'm thrilled to have Drewsicology joining us. I first encountered Drew through my digital friend Pete from the channel Strange Theology. Pete invited me onto a live stream to discuss music and spirit. I've linked it in the description. Pete wanted to explore the idea engaging with Drewsicology on X. During the stream, I shared my scattered and simplistic thoughts on music, spirit, beauty, and truth, all of which I've been personally reevaluating over the last several years and more intently in the last several months. I think I saw a comment or two from Drew on that live stream video. A day or two later, the topic came up again on Twitter, and there I found Drew, Pete, and me memeing and discussing ideas about music, the humanity, and divine spirit. Drew's insights were incredible. I knew I needed to have a deeper conversation with him. So I reached out. We set a date. Drew sent me a list of his podcast appearances, and wouldn't you know it, he'd already been a guest on Paul Vanderklay and Karen Wong's channel, and with Neil deGrasse of Dirt Poor Robin's fame, as well as with Derek Fielder's podcast. That made perfect sense. A little about Drew. He's an international school band and choir teacher in Tunisia and has also taught in Indonesia. He has deep interests in non-Western music, music as an apologetic, and exploring the existential question, what is music? He is a classically trained and jazz saxophonist, as well as classically trained in Arabic music on instruments like the oud and the kanan. It seems that Drew seeks a holistic musical understanding, aiming for a type of musical theory of everything. In a recent tweet, Drew said, "Music was never disenchanted, but musical theory was." I'm excited to dive into some conversation craft about music and meaning with Drew today on the Yours Truly podcast. And if this conversation is meaningful to you, let us know by leaving a comment. So without further delay, I give you Drewsicology. Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud. Drew, welcome. Oh, there you are. There you are. Oh, on, off, on, off. Got you muted.
Check, check. All right. Wow, what an intro. Thank you, Christian.
You're welcome. Yeah, this is me practicing some writing. I'm not much of a writer, but as I've been doing this, it's kind of fun to have a built-in option to practice a little bit of writing. So I've been enjoying making.
Yeah, you're doing a great job, and I'm glad to be here to have this conversation with you.
Well, cool, man. Yeah, well, yeah. As I was mentioning in the intro, I had a conversation with Pete, and we were talking. He brought in, I think it was based off of a tweet you did about Judy Garland's voice that someone else was talking about. And I've come from this background. Well, I would just say of like a disembodied atomization idea about music even within the church, and or especially within the church, actually. So like when I started kind of getting into looking with that, well, there was a conversation, we were talking about AI or something in music, and it was a little tongue in cheek, but then also I was like, man, the people that are engaging on this is at much higher level, that I feel like I'm crossing a threshold into a paradigm shift for myself or a rediscovery of certain things. And then I go on to see that you have, have a very, very deep interest in music, like qua music. And I was like, wow, I wonder if we could spark up a conversation and bring, see what would kind of come from that, and get to pick your brain, your ideas about your work, what you're doing, practically, but also maybe, I don't know, what your life's work part of it, your intellectual work part of it as well. So yeah, man, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, as soon as you use the word music, you're already dropping in some cultural baggage just with the very word music. And especially what you were talking about, church music. 1,500 years ago, church music was one way, and today it's a completely different way. And where does the contours of history and culture, and how have we been shaped by, you know, the imminent frame, the modern world. How do we, as I mean, I'm a fellow Protestant, you know, how do we reintegrate, you know, because we have well, we straddle that world between, let's say, market and church, you know, and the way, like the way CCM develops, it uses, you know, market ways to change, to affect change. You know, Gregorian chant is consistent, you know, Byzantine chant, you know, Greek Orthodox music, things like this. These things have lots of staying power over many centuries. You know, but, you know, we in the evangelical church, our aesthetic follows the zeitgeist in a lot of ways. And I don't think it, you know, I'm not necessarily in the camp of, CCM is just a carbon copy of what's going on in the secular world. I actually do think you can hear some trace aesthetic differences if you just listen to, you know, Lauren Daigle or, you know, Hillsong compared to like what's going on. Anyways, so that's interesting. I think for me, my journey has been, first of all, one of, I just wanted to be as great as a musician as I possibly could be, and developing and honing my craft as much as possible, and also helping my students hone their crafts as much as possible. And along that journey, I discovered, you know, that music is way deeper and more diverse, you know, beyond horizons that I could have seen even in my, I've my first degree was in music education at a very mainstream, you know, Bachelor of Music Education program. But the horizons that are out there are unbelievably vast and deep. And so when I listen to the conversations happening around the corner, the conversations happening around Jordan Peterson, Jonathan Pajot, and they'll talk about music, and I'll read the comments and what people are saying. And there are some things that they're really scratching at that are important to pry open and to, well, let's really explore that. But they're missing the element of, well, they don't know how to talk about sound. Right. And then there's the other element of, well, there's so much happening in Asia and Africa and Latin America and in these remote places where music is being done in a way that that maybe perhaps in ways we wouldn't define as music, and it's happening in places where they don't have a word for music. You know, and so back to what I said at the start, you know, as soon as you start using the word music in the way we're using it in the modern world, you're already assuming some things, like music is a distinct domain separate from these other recreational activities that we might pursue. It's an art, you know, it belongs to the creative fine arts over here, and then we have reason and the sciences over here, right? So it's already you know, laden with this cultural intellectual baggage. But in many traditional cultures, you know, I'm thinking in the Amazon or, you know, in the bush, there is no word for music as a distinct behavior. It's they sing their cosmos, they dance their tribe, it's integrated with work and their ecology and family and kinship, and there's a much more holistic put togetherness, that is. I like to use, so John Blacking is an ethnomusicologist from the 70s, and he wrote a book called How Musical is Man? And the first chapter starts the journey. The name of the first chapter is Music is Humanly Organized Sound. And then the last chapter, he ends the journey with Music is Soundly Organized Humanity, where it's not just humans that are shaping the music, but it's the music that's shaping the people. And so there's all sorts of new topics to explore, and it's sort of let's say a gap in the literature when it comes to the corner in terms of, you know, who's bringing in the intellectual know-how to these kinds of issues. And I noticed that lots of people like this this is a topic that's fit for print. It's a topic people are interested in discussing, and I feel like, you know, my years of study, and I'm still studying, I'm still learning a lot, that I could fill a need in the discourse.
That all makes a lot of sense, especially you're talking about kind of an anemic section of the intellectual thinky-talky conversation. And to your point about Peterson and Peugeot, you know, and all of us really that are still living in the West, is that is Westocentric in nature for the conversation, because that's where we're at. And but expanding that scope, even like say Peugeot's scope of, you know, 2000 years of liturgical art as an idea, and the fact that it's he's talking about a visual medium, but also you hit on these ideas of, and I'd mentioned this in the intro about just in my own experience feeling like the atomization, like as we're tearing apart the particles of reality in the last 100 years, we're also vivisecting music away from humanity as something that's disembodied, as an other. Oh, it's like, well, like you said, well, there's the art being artistic, and there's being a scientist, and I'll say that something, this is recent in the culture, and I don't know if you caught wind, but Terrence Howard on Joe Rogan. Did you get any of that on there?
So Pete tagged me on what I believe was a Terrence Howard riff on like DNA and frequency. Is this the same thing?
So yeah, this is, again, you have an actor that's trying to do this. Why can't I say the word physicist? He's trying to do physics, basically, and chemistry.
Yeah.
But it's almost, it's representative of like, well, you have the Amazons, and they're not saying that they can't be musical because they're a whole being. But we in our culture say, well, he can't be scientific because he's not a scientist. Now, there are other conversations to be had about expertise, and apart from that, that is another conversation. But it just, a lot of what he talked about, though, and this did make sense to me, is everything does have a frequency or a vibration. The color spectrum is based off of frequency and vibration, all the way down to, you know, what he was talking about, like, you know, and even referencing your conversation with Neil deGrasse and Karen about where she takes it, you know, sometimes to the molecular and cellular level of what is the language and what is the information being shared between these proteins that are acting, you know, based off this code that we don't have, like, you know, words or symbols or, so what's going on there? Maybe it's frequency, you know, and so I think that it is a relevant conversation, because that is our participation in, our embodied participation with frequency. So much of that is music. I don't know, but that's how all that kind of hit me from your opening riff on that. I don't know.
But yeah, I'd like to see a literature review bibliography on that video, just so I can follow up on the science of what does he mean. I mean, I'll take him for his word, but it would be interesting to see what he meant by when he says, it turns out it's frequency. I'm like, oh, that's an interesting turning out, you know, but I don't disbelieve it. I know there's been lots of breakthroughs in particle physics, and I will admit this is a side of the issue that I'm not an expert in. Karen is such an autodidact when it comes to these kinds of topics, and my academic background is more on the anthropological, social, ritualistic side of it, and I'm trying to learn more on the math, physics, biology side more when I have that itch and I need to scratch it. But there are a couple of book titles that I would like to get into. There's one book called The Jazz of Physics, Stefan Alexander, and he is a physicist and a jazz musician who was at Temple University, and he could like bounce ideas with these like jazz professors that taught there. And so he has a theory about the connection between jazz music and the physical particles and how they interact. But something that it's frequency. So I've recently been doing a lot of reading when I have time to read, on Augustine and Boethius. And Boethius, in his book, now he's from the 5th, 6th century, he wrote a whole. So in addition to the Consolation of Philosophy, his most famous text, he also wrote a book just on music, the fundamentals of music. And in that book, he outlines his theory that there are 3 levels of music. Musica instrumentalis, which is the lowest level. This is the level of the sound. This is music we hear played by instruments, and the human voice considered one of those instruments. And then the next level up is musica humana. And at that level, what's being said is the human person, who is a tripartition of body, soul, and spirit, that we are assembled in harmony. And that harmonia, that harmony is musical sort of in nature. And so the music that we hear at the instrumentalis level is an echo or a demonstration or a reverberation of that level of the human person. And then the final level above that is musica mundana. And that's the music of the spheres, that's astral bodies, orbits. And the through line that connects these 3 things is number. This is how the scholastics and the Greeks, this is how they saw it. Frequencies are numbers. And like Augustine had this theory that there's 5 distinct kinds of numbers in the soul, and then the 6th kind of number is in the music. And the reason music moves us so much is because the numbers within correspond to the numbers without entering in, and our soul interacts with that through the medium of our bodies and our ears. And it's because we share these ratios inside and outside that there's this resonance. We must be made of the same harmonies. And so it's a literal theory of a musical anthropology and a musical cosmology, because the same principles that move, the planets and the stars and are those same sort of principles that work in the human person that unite us together holistically, are the same principles that work, and so harmony becomes not just about playing chords and intervals. Harmony is a much broader principle, that those chords are manifesting, that those chords are revealing, but harmony it scales way out. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if, as it turns out, DNA is frequency, right? And things like that. And so that's a really interesting thing. The other thing I wanted to add was, you also mentioned how color is frequency. There's a Sufi mystic that I've read, Inayat Khan, and he's from India originally, early 1900s thinker, and mystic. He comes from an Islamic background, but as a mystic, he's sort of he's sort of multi-faith. He draws from the Bible, he draws from in Hinduism and things like that. And he makes the same observation about how pretty much everything is rhythm, everything is in motion. Rhythm is like the fundamental element, because of frequency. Sound is frequencies, and light is frequencies. Therefore, rhythm is like the foundation of everything. And then it makes me think of Aquinas, who talks about the first mover and things like that. So,
well, it's definitely interesting because we are kind of, what is it that the old joke about, the scientist gets to the top of the mountain and the priest is already there type thing, what it seems like, and even this idea Pajot puts forth of re-enchanting the world, is even within our Protestant impulses, which is downstream Western from Catholicism's scientific endeavors, is that I have lived, many of us have lived in this, we don't know anything until science tells us. And then all of a sudden we discovered that it's new. And that was making me think of something. Well, for one, this anthropologic approach that you're talking about. It's a very human approach, and even this idea that we're connected into the cosmos with that with the celestial spheres and everything else is that we're connected to reality. And I feel like, and you tell me what your thoughts are about coming. I think I've heard you say that you've existed in some like charismatic evangelical worlds, and I've been more of the Baptist evangelical with some charismatic, and then moving into more of like a high church Protestant. But however, that my experience as like a worship leader or within that whole is that we are okay when we feel the Holy Spirit or when we experience God through our worship, which music is that is something completely other, that completely transcends reality. But what I'm wondering or thinking about is that if it is actually putting us in harmony with reality, which is, something along the lines of something like the incarnation, is putting God in harmony with reality. And that because if we just think that we're in this trying to have this we're trying to transcend reality through these experiences, as opposed to be more grounded into reality through that. And that is what then grounds us in our being and in our faith in the creator of it all. And so I don't know how that hits you, but that's something that I think that I've been wrestling with. And even though that Augustine idea that he, kind of was playing with Neoplatonic thoughts about the perfections and that kind of thing, the way that you framed it kind of was more about these being a reality in connection to the celestial. And then, now we're talking about into the micro worlds, that Peugeot, that these things are fractal and whatnot. But anyways, that's just something that's been bouncing around in my brain a little bit in reference to something that we talked about, church music. But
that was really great, Christian. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. So, sound is revelatory. On a very basic level, you hear a sound and it must have had some cause. And so right now, I have a bunch of lemon trees around my house, I'll hear a thumping outside and say, oh, a lemon must have fallen off of the tree, right? In music, a single note is not just one sound, as you know. There's a whole harmonic series of sound waves that are happening ad infinitum, and we only perceive the first couple of those tiers of sound. But it turns out that without all of the other overtones happening, we wouldn't hear the sound. We wouldn't hear it as pitch. Like those overtones, is what they call them, are the reason you can hear my voice as pitch, as opposed to like, those overtones that doesn't resonate because the overtone sound waves are misaligned to the fundamental wave. So all that to say that there's something inherently revealing, revelatory in the phenomenology of just how sound works. And then there's also this time thing where it unfolds over time. And so, like you mentioned, the fractal that Peugeot talks about, and we've been talking about things scaling. Music, whether it's worship music or symphony music or soundtrack, any type of music does this, where it's cycles within cycles, it's layers within layers, it's things that scale over time. And in the visual world, in the world of symbol, in the world of icon, in the world of painting representation, it's easy to say, like, okay, I have an icon of a cross, I have a painting of a cross, I have a sculpture of a cross, and then I have an actual Roman cross, something like this. And that those sort of scale, right? And then in the Pajovian, the symbolic world, like these things are like the fractal is a visual reference. I would submit that music is the compression of the fractal. Like the way we know life is a fractal, music is the representation of the fractal. Like, so it's not that, we're looking in this world and we're just looking at pieces of the fractal and we can't see the forest from the trees or something like that. Well, the way we can compress everything down into this small comprehensible experience, and it happens to be that time is also part of the fractal, right? That music is, go back to Inayat Khan, who I referenced earlier. He says that music is the representation of reality, the word we just used, in its most exact miniature form. And that's it's so mysterious because, and I wrote a Substack piece about this, because like you hear a note and it's like, that doesn't mean a word. It doesn't trigger an image. It doesn't trigger an object. If I played like a 3-note pattern on a piano, we're not going to say, oh, we're not going to both agree that corresponds to the word rock if I hear those 3 notes. It's music is communicating on a way different, like just semiotic level than how words and images function. But principally time is involved. And then it's also this whole idea of multi-layered patterns, as Peugeot and Peterson often comment. Part of the pattern was, so you mentioned disembodiment before, is that we are part of that pattern, we as people. That's why Boethius theorizes a musica humana level, that we're assembled musically, we're assembled harmonically. And so that human connection to the music, the other thing that I've been thinking about music is, it's not, where does music come from? Was it made by God? And I heard somebody say on a podcast, music comes from God, and it does. But how does it come from God? Was it did he say, let there be music, and then there was music? I don't think so. I think, not in the same way that he said, let there be trees, and let there be animals, and let there be fish. Music is a response, like so how in the Psalms there's always the antiphonal thing, right? There's this first line and then there's this response, right? And that's that liturgy, that antiphonal liturgy is so baked into the Jewish and in the Christian liturgy, our worship experience, that song itself is always done afterwards. God did something, and so we sing in response. So music, all that to say, to sort of tie this all up, God made the cosmos, God made the heavens and the earth, God made people in this intricate reality that scales at so many levels. And in response, the way we celebrate that is through song, and through this way of harmonizing patterns and representing that as worship and praise. It's taking what God did and then using the means that we best know how to represent what God did through this expressive form. And that happens to be what we're calling music.
I did a video a while back where I kind of just sat down. I'm helping a community of people do some worship in a house right now, but I'm using like a historical liturgical format, and I just made a video. I was like, I'm just gonna walk through how I do this process. And as I was doing it, to your point about compression, is I don't know. I felt like was experiencing this insight to the fact that what I'm actually doing is trying to compress the transcendent into a time and place. That's kind of what, and that's even visually we do that with iconography, is a compression of that Roman cross, of that crucifixion, is also musically is a compression of, go back to that Augustine, of the cosmos. Like we're trying to compress that relationship and that harmony into a sacred or a holy time, that's a proper response to that. And then as we got into the idea of response, it took me as a Christian to the one that I guess that I unbeknownstly wrote a song to a friend of mine. We co-wrote a song based off the Magnificat, Mary's Magnificat, because that is, as Baptists, we aren't thinking about the historical nature. It's like, oh, this is cool, scripture. But that is a response to, to wonder is a song. And, and David, and like you were referencing, and I like the idea. In worship, that word you used, antiphonal, but like that, the antiphon as a response to, I guess, the phon, or like this play, and have been lightly incorporating that basically off of a historical one of Psalm 51, and that my wife showed me, because she was raised kind of high church Lutheran, like when we were 20, and she was like, hey, this, I really like it when we do this in church. And it was this antiphon of Psalm 51. Of course, I didn't have any context for that back then, but as I'm carrying it to the 20 years later, it's like, rediscovering both of those things actually as response. I've got some questions here we can steer our conversation with, unless you wanted to respond to that specifically. But also,
the only thing I wanted to add is the antiphon, like we see that in call and response in African American music, in jazz, in blues, and in the church. And although the timbres and the grooves are not the same as in mass, or at least in certain masses, or in or in many evangelical churches, that call and response is a fundamental liturgical
practice
element.
That made me think that, well, what the antiphon of Psalm 51 is a response to, like a confession of sin, is to sing that psalm, as what it was for David. So that makes a ton of sense. So one of the things that I picked up on was this idea. Well, your name, your channel or your Twitter or whatever, your handle, Drewsicology. Music. It's a play on musicology, like the study of Drew's study of music, and but we've already hit on this a little bit, but maybe unpacking this more directly is music as an apologetic.
So as I got more into studying ethnomusicology, as I became more curious about these sounds that are very different from what my ear was attuned to hearing. For example, gamelan music from Indonesia, the tuning systems are not tuned to the Western system. So like when I lived in Indonesia, I would play saxophone with a group of gamelan musicians, and like I'd play F sharp and I was too flat, and then I'd go up to a G and I was too sharp one way and I was too flat the other way. And I'm like, well, what am I supposed to do here? And so those are eye-opening experiences. And then hearing, if you ever listen, like just YouTube, like Korean classical music or Southeast Asian classical music, like you're going to hear some timbres that might frighten you if you're not used to hearing them. But this is regal, erudite music. This is a tradition that's well regarded. And so it began to pry open this whole idea that, well, are there universals in music? How is it that, they say music's a universal language. What does that mean? Music's a universal language. And in ethnomusicology, that's their popular axiom that they love to debunk. No, it's not, because if it was, then all of us could listen to a Hindustani raga and understand what's happening. And clearly we don't, right? And so there's particularities to different music traditions. But it's also true that music is universal. Every culture, every society, every people has a music, whether you call it a music. Everybody sings, right? Every society sings. even in those restrictive societies where they're literally anti-music, they're still chanting the Quran, for example, or, things like that. Music for me, I began to realize that it's very mysterious. It's something I've taken for granted as someone who's always played in ensembles. I just, you just do it, and, eventually you get good at it, so people will pay you to do it, and you just sort of do it because behaviorism. and
it's fun too.
Absolutely. But when you stop to think about it, you're like, what is this? What am I doing? Why? What is this thing? The whole defamiliarization process. Because when you stop and think about it, it's a really strange thing to just play riffs on a saxophone, right? Or to play chords on a piano. What is happening here? What is, it's so beyond the intellect for me. It's so, in terms of the value of what it does. So that was one thing, just realizing how strange music is. And then also throwing that up against, okay, so I've had many conversations about faith with atheists in my life, and not a few of them are musicians who play in bands. Oftentimes it's rock and roll bands. We'll have a conversation about faith, and they'll say something like, I just don't understand how you can believe it, right? Because it, the science, show me the science, show me the reason. And then like Saturday night, they're rocking away, just manifesting this primal, non-rational mode of attention, right? This, and so I thought, well, that's kind of weird, so how does music fit into the worldview of everything must be rational, right? Everything, and I began to start hypothesizing. I began to start, what if music is an escape hatch for people who wrestle with faith? Because, and Peterson will say this, it's like, you can't argue against it, even though there's no proof that it means what we say it means. Like, if you ask people what they think about music, they'll tell you it was something so romantic about, how music changed their life, and this song was so important to them, and they can't live their lives without music. Regardless of what your religion is, people will say this about music. They feel so strongly about it, and yet you can't rationally debunk it, right? And so it exists in a disenchanted world. Music exists as this escape hatch of enchantment that we just keep going back to, and that's why Peterson would say, in the death of God, music was like a relief. It was like, and that is, happens to coincide in that 60s onwards, that just music explodes with genres and subcultures. If you ever go to Wikipedia and look up list of 20th century subcultures, like 80% of them are just music genres, right? Because the genre was also a vibe. It was like a philosophy. It was a style. It was a community. To your point about the disembodiment, like, we've lost that. Like, there aren't many genres today that people rally behind. Now it's usually around an artist. If it's anything, it's, it's the Swifties or, things like, and that's not a bad thing. But in this very mediated age, that subculture, you used to go to the school cafeteria, and then you could just peg each table by the genre of music they would listen to, kind of a thing. So in any case, I heard Justin Brierley talking to Glenn Scrivener on a conversation that they were having about apologetics, and where's the conversation today? And as everybody who follows this well knows, that New atheism is a bit blasé. Those arguments from science, etc. People don't resonate with those arguments. People don't live their lives that way. How do people live their lives? They live their lives pursuing meaning. They live their lives pursuing meaning in all sorts of ways. And music happens to be one of those things that we do to find meaning, or to cultivate it, or to, we'll leave our lives and go to a concert to experience some moment of transcendence and community. to recover some part of that's missing in our lives, something like this. And so in that conversation, like music comes up as like this really important topic for them, because they keep talking about how music helped open the door for people's hearts to see God in some ways. Like when they listen to Bach, like there's just something in that music that speaks to me, and I don't understand why, right? It's that, that whole argument from Beauty piece. But they say in that conversation, like Justin Briley says, music is the unexplored apologetic, right? And this is after about 15 minutes of them discussing it. And that's when I started latching onto that concept of the unexplored apologetic. And so I co-opted Boethius's musica, levels of musica, instrumentalis, humana, mundana. And so the name of my Substack publication is Musica Apologia, because the original verse, when Peter talks about be prepared to give a defense for the reason for your hope, that word hope is where the music is, right? The reason for my hope, it's not I have these 5 proofs for the existence of God. It's this hope over here, right? The reason for my hope. And so music gives lots of people hope. And it is itself kind of a reason. So my hope is that, I'm able to elucidate that for people.
It's interesting conceptually to think about music as a hope. There are a couple of things I want to try to draw out if I can hold on to them. But the last piece is, the stories of the African-American slaves, singing songs about freedom. And even I would say the hymns born out of Depression era America about mansions and glory, that is a big relation that carries a strong relationship to music. The other piece that I couldn't help but kind of consider is also, though, that like that's a specific way that music is used, but music's used in a lot of other ways that aren't so hopeful, that are maybe nihilistic but I think it even still points to this idea of music as an apologetic, or music that is sensual, or music that is maybe even purposely attempting to be evil. I don't know. Since you have this, and that's just not something our Western world just says that music isn't anything but music. It's not connected to something spiritual. But yet here we are, we all intuitively know that's not true, but we want to say that things are static, or that things are just arbitrary, and yet they're not. So I was interested in how you would also do the inverse of that.
I hear what you're asking, and I want to get this out first. So Pete was asking about spirit and music, and he was like, well, what parts of music correspond to spirit? And I don't really know how the metaphysics work out in that question. I pitched a guess, but I don't know how relevant the question is, to be frank. But music is spiritual, regardless of the genre. I'll just start with the Bible, and then we'll move outwards. So King Saul has a spirit that afflicts him, and music is the remedy. David playing the harp, right? And that's not just a one-off, because when the advisors are like, we should go find a harp player, that's not like a novel idea. That was an assumption. Oh, if there's an evil spirit that's plaguing you, you should have a harpist. Like, I'm sure that was not the first time that was called for as a remedy. Okay. The prophets throughout the Old Testament, there's heavy connection between music and prophecy. 2 Kings 3:15, 16, Elisha is called upon to prophesy, to get a word from the Lord from these kings who want to go to war. And Elisha says, first, bring me a harpist, bring me a musician, someone who can play. He doesn't say anything else. He just says, bring me a musician. And then it says, when the harpist plucked, when the harpist played, the word of the hand of the Lord came upon Elisha. So there's something, there's an assumption. It's not explicitly stated, but there's an assumption that what's happening there is tuning the prophet to hear, to feel, to perceive better. There's something going on there, right? I mean, Samuel, the book of Samuel has these amazing stories where King Saul wants to go kidnap or assassinate David. So he sends this first group of guys to go grab him, and then David's in the company of prophets. And then it's like, as soon as they see him, like these guys, they fall on their knees and they start prophesying, right? And music was part of that because, well, there's references in Samuel we can look at. So in any case, the temple and the use of song, it describes the ministry of singing and playing of trumpets and harps and lyres and cymbals. It's described as the ministry of prophecy accompanied by these instruments, things like that. Okay. What is music? Like, in other words, sound. What is happening with sound? Sound is entering your body. Okay. And when you hear that beat, what do you start to do? Oftentimes, you're going to move to it. Okay. At the very basic level, when you start in training to that beat, there's something outside coming in and it's causing you to move. Okay. This is a rudimentary illustration of what possession of a spirit is. So, like, what does it mean to be possessed by a spirit? Classically, would say a spirit has entered you and is now causing you to behave in these ways. Well, this is what music does. I'm not saying music is a spirit, but I kind of am. It's functioning in the same kind of way. And now when you think about how genres tap into some spiritual zeitgeist, like the messaging and the aesthetic and the acoustic, when that gets into your body, into your system, and then you start vibing to that, you begin manifesting through the body the spirit of the music. So there is this music spirit connection. Like, music kind of is spirit. It helps that you don't see sound waves. It's an invisible force. I'm reminded of when Jesus says the Holy Spirit is like wind that you can hear, right? And it goes and you don't know where it's coming from. And so when I talk about music as an apologetic, I'm not necessarily saying that all music is ordained, let's say. But what I am saying is that, like, when you're playing with music, you're playing with something kind of dangerous. Like, you're playing with something that you don't fully control. You're playing with something that you might not have power to understand. You're playing with fire in a lot of ways. And that's kind of the point for a lot of people, right? When you go to I recently read an ethnographic study of the Grateful Dead. There was an author who, Robin Sylvan, she's a sociologist, and she examined popular music. And so she interviewed Deadheads, people who went to Grateful Dead concerts. And, like, the whole point is to surrender to a spirit, like literally spirits. And the music guides you through that. And then drugs are also involved. I think if we as a culture can at least start to peel back our naivete, I guess, about how this thing that we just so take for granted, it's not even really that it's like an enchanting force. It's like, it's an enchanting force of profound spiritual ramifications. And we need to be careful with it. That's why Plato was like, we should only have Dorian and Phrygian, ban all the other scales.
Yeah. So it's, where do you aim it? And again, what's the,
exactly. Yeah.
I guess the teleology, and what is also it being grounded in its ontology. Those things matter. And again, I think, well, I want to go two different ways. Here's an experience I had. And when I was 16 or so, and I was starting to get into all this, modern worship, you know, and this was all around like early 2000s. I was in high school, and we start, you know, doing some of the stuff at church, and it's like a Sunday night, and you know, we get up there and we're playing some, you know, like Third Day song or something, you know, and one of the deacons like face turns red, and he just like, after he can't take it, and after a while he just storms off. And I've kind of have two perspectives on that, because ultimately I was like, I mean, it made me nervous to like, I realize now that I was trampling on a source of his meaning, like the hymnody, traditional Baptist hymnody. I was trampling on that with rock and roll. Now, what's interesting is theologically, he doesn't have an argument against it. In when you get to the fact that worship is, and you'll understand this, only about the heart. But in those lower settings, worship is also only about music. And so, but music is, like we're talking about it, even, you know, whether that's globally, but even regionally or even generationally, music, we attach memories to that. We attach worship to different ways of doing music. And I realized now that I'm older that I wasn't a fit, you know, he might have his own way of thinking about what I was doing, or what I was rebellious, or what I was, you know, we're trying to, but ultimately I was, you know, taking away a certain kind of meaning from his religious practice. And so, and living through something like the worship wars of, you know, the American evangelical, you know, world, and all those things, that put me into a different mindset about it. Yet here we are, you know, in 2000, almost 25, and we have this thing now within the church. This rock and roll is in the church, and
now it's like synthesizers, like is the primary, like, sort of aesthetic.
And I did hear you talking to Neil about that, because, and that you kind of have attached that to, like, either it's a type of the drone, you know, within Eastern meditation or Eastern music. And it was totally, you know, for someone that was like, oh, look, now we can get an MP3 of a pad that we can play, and then it can actually, we can play on top of it, and it can be the baseline for when everything goes out, and we don't have to be self-conscious with silence anymore. We have this continuous drone that keeps us in that state that you were referencing earlier.
Right. Yeah.
But these were all just like intuitions of these rock worship leaders. Like, it wasn't some, you know, we want to tap into this Eastern tradition. It was, we want to keep people from being self-conscious, or we don't want to break the spirit, or, you know, and like, we want people to be able to not get distracted, or these kinds of things. And it's like, how can we do that? Well, let's just have like the root key or something, the root and the 5 just going oscillating, and we can just play on top of it. And then it got really cool. I could put them into ProPresenter's individual slides, and they could crossfade into different keys. Anyways, and now what they're doing with automation is even more interesting. But that also kind of leads into the conversation about you know, technology and music, and even then into something like artificial intelligence and music. And so I'm interested to see if you've been have any thoughts about those two things, and maybe how they reference, obviously, church music, but even just globally. I don't know if all that.
That was really interesting thoughts. And those are big questions too. Going back to your example of playing rock and roll that disrupted the deacon sensibility about hymnody. In my head, I went to a verse when Paul says, "Live in harmony with one another." That's in I think it's Romans. And I don't know if that Greek word is harmoniae. That'd be cool if it was. I don't know if it is. That could just be the English translation of it. But I think it was Augustine in his book on music. He talked about, or it was Boethius. They both kind of said the same things, but basically about when you hear sounds, when you hear music that you disagree with, those sounds are dissonant with the harmony within, like something like that. And so when you think about a congregation, the purpose of a congregation is as one body, right? Retuning yourself to the divine, to Christ, reorienting as one body. And the purpose of music in that as a literal harmonizing device, right?
Cohesive, adhesive.
Yeah.
Cool.
Where's the room for innovation in that if the congregation is used to these sounds take us here, those sounds they mean something else semiotically, right? Because drums meant something totally different, than something that was sacred, and okay, and obviously now putting on my anthropologist hat, like in Africa, drums are how you get healed from sickness. Drums are how you remember your ancestors. Drums are how you recognize your place in the cosmos. Incidentally, that's where sort of our drumming culture sort of comes from. Our syncopated beats, like that's the tradition, is that those West African beats there. Any sound can be repurposed for anything. Like you said, it's how you aim it. There's a movement of Christian ethnomusicologists. It's a specific discipline called ethnodoxology, and they are like consultants and music scholars and language experts who they help local churches around Africa and Asia and places that are not the modern Western world on helping these congregations establish their worship arts without putting on the Western style. Because so like an example would be like in Senegal or the Ivory Coast. As soon as back in the day, it would be as soon as like this part of the village would convert. Okay, now they had to wear a coat and tie, and then they had to sing in 4-part hymnody. And so those on the outside, like they would look at the Christians who went into the church, and they would say, "Oh, well, you just became Americans. Like you became Europeans. Like that's what it means to be a Christian, is to be that." And so ethnodoxology is all about, in a redemptive way, well, how can we leverage, tap into the heart music and culture and style of a people, and can it be repurposed and redeemed? Can those drums honor the Holy Spirit and inspire His activity, right? Because the whole idea is it's supposed to open the heart. Music is that's what it's supposed to do. And as long as it's in the right context with the right purpose, then it certainly can be. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there's that broadens the picture of how we relate to music, and there was teaching or culture obviously that taught that this rock and roll music was of the devil. So they would say, and here it is, this guy probably 30 years later after the Beatles, and he's like, now it's in my church, something like that. I'm projecting that, but I think it is representative to that. And I loved how you brought that into, it was a cultural phenomenon, and here it is now. It is a part of many people's weekly spiritual practice.
Yeah.
Something that I've been kind of curious about or think about related to it, because I mean, it's what ultimately formed and shaped me, and it's kind of what I have. You don't want me to lead a historical or traditional music in a church. I don't have the skills for it. I can play, forms of rock and folk music on, guitar, and I can get I can get an ensemble to, I know how to get an ensemble to be cohesive and intelligible within that genre. But I guess my question is, because you kind of, you said something in there about this, and then that, like, interfering with something that's sacred. You kind of mentioned that. And is there some kind of universal sacred way to approach music? And and how I think about that within, Western church, within my context, is something like this. Let's have a rock concert on Friday night and let it aim towards like something more sacred on Sunday. But I don't know exactly what does that just mean hymns? Does that just mean organ? Does that just mean a cappella voices? Like, I don't know, but there's something about like a place we wanted to bring rock and roll into Sunday, and so much about it, but then it's like, but then we want to try to compress, like, okay, let's have the fun song at first, but then let's turn it into, the transcendent anthem or whatever, as we go. But I'm wondering if we should decompress that a little bit and not, damn rock and roll for obviously from like we got to get rid of this all completely out of the culture, but like see it as a space to to that has its own place in like a hierarchy of participation, but that I don't think it necessarily represents something like trying to put that right next to Eucharist just doesn't seem to make sense. And so I think, but I don't think that either of those things, or I don't want to just juxtapose one as evil, even though I think it could be used in evil ways, just like a lot of things can. But.
It's a very hard question, and you're talking to a Protestant, so I'm going to give you one answer. And if you talk to an Orthodox, they would give you probably a very different answer about what is the sound of the sacred, and what should be prescribed in the church and things like that. I mean, like it is like, I mean, what is it? Paul Vanderklay talks about, we're still protesting, Protestants, like the protest never ended, even more so, given the Jesus music, right? As what it's called, in the, there's no going back. Like that toothpaste is outside of the tube, right? And there's no putting it back in, right? So I'm reminded of Ecclesiastes 3 on this conversation. So there's a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. That's interesting. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. And I love this passage in my exploration of what is music. Music is uniquely connected to time in ways that others are not. In many tribal cultures, the seasons don't change unless you have sung the song, right? Once you have done the ritual that you chanted, now it's now this season, right? So, and we live, so cycles and times and things like this. Anyways, what's interesting here is that these are not times of chronos, right? The time to be born and the time to die is not a calendared, minuted time. None of these times are. This belongs to the element called kairos, which is a different way of thinking about time. It's more of the
Moment.
appropriate season, right? Kairos. And music straddles both Chronos and Kairos. The Chronos of music is the meter, the rhythm, how long notes are, the durations and things like that. Like when we talk about a measure of music, like it's a measurement of time. We're measuring time in that way. It's a different way of doing Chronos. And so like we entrain ourselves to this new time. And part of that experience, when you put your when you attend to this new Chronos, it sort of plucks you out of the mundane time that you were just living in, and now you're in this new time. It's like this virtual reality kind of a thing. But there's also Kairos that's at work. So the Kairos comes from, well, what's the music making you feel, right? I only need 3 seconds of a sample of a song to tell you, is this going to make me feel sad? Is this going to make me tap my foot? Is this going to make me meditate? Is this so the vibe of the song through using things like harmony, texture, timbre, expression, what instruments and what sounds you use, things like that. This 5-minute song is a time to heal because that's what the song is about, right? Or this 3-minute war chant, right, is a time to get myself amped up before the battle, right? Or all sorts of things. So clearly and obviously, different styles of music do different things to you phenomenologically. Like they wire you, and you're participating in different Kairos moments.
Yeah, moments.
Yeah. So something like playing, Third Day, or anything from the modern CCM movement is like, that's a Kairos, like, and that's something that you don't get in other forms. And then, see, like when I lead worship, I like to do like all things for all people kind of a thing. So I'll do like Victory in Jesus, and then I'll do like modern, some super modern CCM song, and then I'll do some African gospel song, and then a hymn, because I don't articulate this usually, but because we're having this conversation, I will. It's because each of those is a Kairos. Each of those is, and there's a gift there. There's a grace there in each of those for one person in the room, for everybody. When everybody is singing the song together, that's a moment of communal cohesion. But then there's also somebody like, that Kairos is doing some work, some healing work, for example, or some work of repentance in somebody, and a lot of that. So anyways, I personally think, and it's because I'm a Protestant evangelical, I personally think that there is space for everything in the acoustomology, to use a word from the books of the church. When Revelation talks about, like, there's going to be billions of people speaking all sorts of languages, I mean, they're going to be singing all sorts of scales as well. Like they're going to bring all sorts of different kinds of sounds to the table in celebration, right, of the Lord.
That's interesting. I feel that, like, I mean, the tension for me is trying to get like a unified spirit, in that coming together, where in other spaces it seems like that we can like navigate towards our more individuated preferential, taste and whatnot, towards to that point being like, so you have, well, I guess what I'm saying is I think that it is important, like, for everyone to be able to sing together, in that space as much as possible, and that something like in the advent of contemporary worship, where we do have something like the artist as the driving force for that that time and place. The artist is always seeking new inspiration and new new inspiration or new songs. And that creates a tension to be able to get the community to be of one voice or something, and that, I think that's the tension that I feel like I'm wrestling with, that I was even thinking, even when I was still working at a church doing that, was, I don't know, if we're always going forward, it's hard. And I think there was a Kairos moment within the American West where rock was being incorporated in this, from the Jesus culture on, but even around the turn of the century, where the market was kind of involved, but not so involved. There was a lot of like grassroots on how certain songs were getting propagated out, that we didn't, maybe some of it was Napster, but probably not a whole lot of it was Napster. It was like, it was this guy at a camp, and then they took that to their church, and then their church sang it, and then some kid heard it at that church and took it to his, like, and they sing it at, on their special on Sunday, and blah, blah, blah. Like, there was kind of, and kids are much more, apt to be able to pick up something new and want to get, and then wear it out. But there's a threshold at some point where it's like, I'm only listening to the same 5 bands I listened to when I was in, high school or something. Like we kind of lose that.
Yeah.
I don't know. So there's some things that I think about related to, I guess, the sacred, on how to be a part of, I guess, pushing back, not against, not in a, it's wrong for these artists to be introducing new music all the time. They're being artists. I'm not going to blame an artist for being an art, like, for being creative. I just think that to put that as the, like when you put like the guys at Elevation or the Hillsongs or the songwriters like a Brooke Fraser, and you put them as the front of that, like, we don't even have enough time to, and we're calling this is our canon, but we're like outpaced by our ability to incorporate the new always. And it might be wonderful. It might be beautiful. I mean, I like Brooke Fraser is one of my favorite songwriters, but it's like, I've got to take this new song off her album. We got to incorporate this new song off. And, it's like, because I'm an artistic-ish person that like wants to seek this new inspiration and incorporate, for a church body, I feel like that kind of there's a certain amount of sense making that I feel like that doesn't make.
It's very prudent. And this is a unique problem that we deal with in our part of the Christendom. I mean, I'll start with this, right? The book of Psalms is the same 150 Psalms for eons, right? Thousands of years. These are the songs that Jesus sang at supper time. These are the songs that Jesus quoted over and over again at different stages, right? But even in the Psalms, it says sing a new song, right? So you have this, I don't know if it's a tension and resolution so much as just we need to keep it in balance, that there are anthems and there are songs that stay with us. And then there's also like, don't stop writing new songs, both of those elements are there. Now, I think if you think of a church, if you think of Jesus's 12 disciples as a church, right? Like we're all disciples moving together, right? That a given church at a given period of time is growing together at a certain pace, especially if you have a stable community. This doesn't apply if you have like an unstable people coming and going and things like that. But if you have a stable community and you're growing over time, well, it's just good teaching to repeat things, right? And to develop, because like music is about relationships, and we have relationships with our songs, and we also have relationships with one another. And those relationships with one another can strengthen the more our relationships to our songs also strengthen, as we all together learn to love these songs, so we are also loving one another in that moment of communitas, of communal celebration. So there is that element. You're not gonna like, you're not gonna, I mean, like, okay, I mean, yeah, my area of tension is, to what degree do we rely on music as the means of, you know what I mean, of like going over the edge and into the spirit, you know, like the whole idea of like, there's a great, this is total distraction, sorry, but there's a really funny YouTube channel, Kevon Carter. He's a black musician, church musician. He's got these hilarious videos about the 4-chord. It's like when a song ends on the 4-chord, like everyone just goes nuts, like in the spirit, you know, it's like the Holy Spirit shows up because that's the chord that the Holy Spirit shows up on. But we have that idea a little bit on these certain sounds or the triggers, right? But in any case, you're not going to achieve that through music. Like you're not going to do that community building, community aligning work where we all reach this moment of surrender, I guess is the word I'm looking for, if we don't have a relationship with the songs that we're singing, right? I mean, it's like the only time I tear up, I will rarely tear up at music the first time I hear something brand new. When it does, it's because it's an absolutely special piece of music. But I've also heard those sounds before deep down within me, and they're just being assembled in a new, surprising way, right? But most of the time, when I tear up at music, it's because that's bringing up some things that are deep within me in my memory, from nostalgia, from, you know, like when you sing a song that you sang as a kid, like you touch that part of you from when you were a kid, and then there's a longing that's tapped into there. And I'm just talking about emotion. I'm not even talking about the work of the Spirit or anything like that. So in any case, it's just good teaching for a church as a group of disciples growing together to keep practicing, like literally in the sense of musical practice, like practice your songs together so that when they do come up again, it's like you're way more confident in what you're singing and what you're doing. But yeah, I mean, like, don't let the water get too stale either, right? In that sense, let there be motion, but then let there be this consistency, this, you know, well that we can, you know, go back to together.
You mentioned like the music as a means, and then you kind of had this pause, and I don't know what the pause exactly, but it's like when I hear that, like I have thought that music acts in place of a sacrament within within low church Protestantism. And
Paul Enlightener has said that.
Yeah, and so yeah, I hope to speak to him someday. The thing about that is that it is kind of something, unless you're the practitioner, music isn't something that you can touch or taste. You know, you can kind of feel it, but with our senses, and that, and then also you talked about this work of the community, and that's where the you know, the word liturgy or liturgic, you know, like is a translation is the work of the people, and those elements together. I do think that when you only have music and preaching, that we miss opportunity for further community and further work, but also for it to have, to point us to, again, like this tell us that maybe we then, I can't remember how you ended that. It was something about, you didn't say fall down before, you said surrender. Yeah, it's to surrender to Christ, to, you know, the you know, we've experienced, you know, that idea of the altar call, you know, as a place for that, you know. But again, it still seems like when you don't have, when because of the iconoclasm, when you don't even have the image to see who you're bowing to, or you don't have the to touch, it's kind of this like mental loop that you stay in that space. It's like there's nothing to actually reach out and touch. there's no one to like actually look to, or or the person that you do look to is holding up a guitar and looks like a rock star, and it's like, psychologically within that context, that's some of the stuff that the way that I've been kind of working through, approaching it kind of psychologically to those things that are happening, not necessarily theologically, or, I can frame it through history because there's these visual frames, but of the why, but there's also good reasons why those things can get corrupted, because you even pointed to that as, when we talk about music getting corrupted or being pointed at something, evil, maybe we could say. And so, I mean, and what, I don't know if you want to respond to that, but also I was be interested to ask if you think that in your cultural in global explorations, like, have you seen music be culturally something beautiful, but then also there's like a distinctive where maybe seems like it points to something more along the lines of a word we would call like evil or dark or something. I don't know if you wanted to respond to that stuff, but also that was a question I had for you.
Yeah. The reason I paused at the word means was because like I get really worried about music's coerciveness, right? It's just a power not to be taken lightly. And I mean, and I don't want to sound too pretentious about it either, but I just really, I just worry about that side of it, and maybe I don't need to, but it's just it's a power to keep in check, I suppose. It's just something to think about, how much power a musician has on stage. So I mean, the closest example that I can think of is the recitation of the Quran, which I've read a bit about. I hear it a lot where I live, and the idea with the recitation of the Quran is that the written word of God, the Quran, the written word, is not ontologically the word of God. It's only becomes the word of God when it's intoned, when it's chanted, using specific principles of pronunciation and intonation. They're very careful not to call it singing. It's not singing. And in fact, if you say it's music, that's a blasphemy, because music for Arabs, for Muslims that are not in the West, the word music has a foreign corrupting connotation to it. I mean, you just turn on the radio, there is Arabic pop music, and they would say that's music, right? Because it's got this bass line, it's got this groove, it's got this swaying sound, things like that. But anyways, so it's this revered tradition. But then you also have these recitation contests where they recite the Quran for like as contests, like who's the best reciter. And it takes on these performative elements of lots of vibrato, lots of, lots of melody in the recitation. And so, I mean, that's just one little example of like, this is something that they intend for beauty, but then, it can take on this prideful element. Like if you focus too much on the sound of it and not on the meaning of it. I think that's a lesson even for Christian worshipers as well. No, I can see that happening even within myself. When I play music, it doesn't even have to be in church. If I'm at a jazz club, and I can feel it when I play, when I'm not giving in to others around me, and I'm more, I don't know, fixated on myself, I guess, or something like that. Like that definitely affects what comes out of my instrument when I'm not trying to be in tune with other people, while I'm playing.
That's an interesting point that's I've kind of kept bouncing in and out, but the idea of being in a band, that was something that was extremely important to me, that I still grieve the loss of that. Because even that, when we talk about, I mean, music has been used in war and different things, the popular, I think it was like HBO or something, the Band of Brothers, that came out, 10 or 15 years ago. That word band of brother, that that's being used about a troop or something, or, but that was an experience that I had, and even a desire, I kind of like, not very tall, not very big. And I kind of, pardon me, gassed out on sports around 10th grade. And so, music then kind of like ascended into this place in my life. And my relationships with other guys was very, and with people just became centered around that. And it is like this thing where, especially whenever you attached it to something like a Christian mission, it has, good evangelicals, it's like that's even the good news, taken out. But that, this group of people, even like the Beatles, like we're a brotherhood, we're going to cross over the whole, we're going to cross the pond, the ocean together, on this like quest. And that music is something that in our culture we take, in lots of cultures. Like, you get a group of guys that, even in the old Home Alone 2, you had the polka, John Candy's polka band in the back of that like, these like this idea of that music relationally can also, it operates in a lot of ways like sports, because one of my friends ended up being a coach who was in my band when we were a lot younger. And we also ended up doing a lot of music at church together. And we would have this such a similar conversation about music, about working with the church band was like working with his basketball team, and like music as, which to that point, I'm curious your thoughts on the idea of precision and excellence within music, within worship and its place. Because I also would deal with this thought about, when people would call it the worship ministry, or, hey, Christian worship was great today. I'm like, what are you really saying?
Yeah.
Were you saying the music was good, or were you saying your personal worship to God felt good, or something, like that we're talking about something specific actually. And in that way, that there's like quality related to it, yet sometimes that comes at the expense of relationship, or expense of like personhood, even in considering somebody else. And so I don't know. I wanted to kind of, I haven't been able to have that conversation necessarily very much out here, to kind of get your thoughts on that.
So I just to let you know, I do need to get going soon because it's 10:04 p.m. over here.
Oh, no way.
My family's going to sleep, but I do want to answer your question.
Okay, great.
I don't have a developed thought about it. I mean, I don't think, play in tune. Come on. Like, play with the good groove. Come on. I mean, it's like it's like, I mean, there is like baseline musicality that I think is, we should expect that. We expect it of our churches when we build the buildings. We expect it of all sorts of things, right? Like I'm thinking more on the level of, if you're going to do something seriously, right? So I will fault no musician for woodshedding hundreds of hours. No, it's not necessary to have an anointed time of worship. I think the real danger is not in the craft of it. I think the danger is, at least it's just, I sense it in myself. The danger is letting my craft, how do I say this? Allowing my craft as a skilled musician come before being a Christ-like relator to the body of Christ, even in my just normal interactions. It's like, yeah, I got great chops, and so that means I can do a good worship set. So I'm off the hook for like any of these other things that I might need to be doing for my church, or, I don't need to greet people at the door, or get to know people on a deeper level. I don't need to serve on this committee or do these other things because because this is, how do I say this? My identity is so wrapped up in my music world, right? And my, the value, how do I say this? The feedback I get is so affirming and validating. And I love it when people tell me those things, like, that sounded awesome. I love it when you do worship. Like, I get I get a dopamine hit from that. But it's for me, I don't want that to make me ineffective in being a good man, I guess I could say, in being a Christ-like disciple in all of my relationships, in all of my ways, right? So, I mean, this happened to me in high school, and it's very similar to what you just said. It's like music was my thing, so I didn't need to try hard in most other things, right? And I don't want to live by that principle, right? It's like the music that I do is a gift. It's something I give freely. It's an honor to do it. It's my, if God uses me in that way, that other people, it's easier for them to connect with God and to surrender their hearts, then praise the Lord. That was not of me. That was because God was working through me. And may it never be that my pride in my musicianship prevents me from loving my neighbor as myself to the best that I possibly can do 100% of the time. Yeah.
Well, Drewsicology. Thanks, everyone. Give him a look on Twitter, or X, formerly known as Twitter. He has some fun engagement over there. And do you have a YouTube channel that you operate or do?
Well, so there is a YouTube. Yeah, you can just look me up on the same name. I've got a smattering of random videos, and then I do have another YouTube channel for Musica Apologia, connected to a Substack.
Okay.
As well.
What is that? Is the Substack under the same name, Music Apologia?
Yeah, Musica Apologia. You can find it. It's just my pinned tweet in my or my pinned post on X.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks for your time, and
thanks for the invite. This was fun.
Good, navigating the vast time difference between our worlds. So yeah, man. Hopefully, it makes sense to do it again in the future. All right,
I'd love to.
All right, we'll talk later, Drew.
All right, bye-bye.
Hey guys, thank you so much for tuning in and staying with us until the end of today's episode. Your support and digital connection is deeply meaningful to me. If you'd have enjoyed our conversation and believe these conversations bring real value to your life and in this space, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. By doing so, you'll be helping me reach the goal of starting a channel membership where we can continue building a TLC, this little corner of the internet sub-community. My hope is to be able to further cultivate digital community on this channel, to be a space where kindred souls can engage deeper, more intimate discussions, and allow space for more private, monthly, yours truly, small group conversations. In the future, I hope to expand this endeavor further, taking yours truly conversation craft out on the road to have meaningful, embodied dialogue with individuals from various corners of the corner. Together, let's continue to build spaces to foster connection, growth, and understanding around deeply meaningful realities. Thanks again for being a part of this journey. Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud.